everybody. Our parks, our trails, and our open spaces all have stories. Family picnics, maybe a hike with a friend, or the quiet times, alone in nature. These are the stories that are personal to the people who experience them. But there are other stories. There are stories that make the news, and this is one of those stories. To tell this, I think I'd like to read from a few of the newspapers at the time. But before I start, I think it's best to warn you, this is a very dark and disturbing tale, because it's true. This is the story of Raymond C. Spang and his family. This article is from the Sunday, June 22nd, 1930 New York Times, New Haven, Connecticut. Raymond C. Spang, a World War veteran, had escaped last night from a Bronx hospital where he was held for insanity. The trip to West Rock Park with his family was a picnic in celebration of his reunion with his wife and children. Spang drove in a borrowed car up the winding, tree-lined road to the summit, which commands a view of Long Island Sound and the surrounding countryside. Parking the car in the cul-de-sac in which the road ends, the family followed a footpath to the edge of the cliff. No one else was in that section of the park at the time, 10 o'clock in the morning. The Spangs left the path and went to a little rock ledge at the brink of the rough face of cliff. From the report of witnesses of the latter part of the tragedy, it is apparent that Mrs. Spang and one of the two boys in the family had wandered back from the edge behind a screen of trees. While they were out of sight, Spang seized his youngest son, Donald, 4 years old, and threw him far out over the edge of the cliff. The little body whirled through the air and fell on the broken rock slope at the base. Youths playing baseball in the lower part of the park saw the body and thought that the child had fallen. They called police and firemen from Westville. Others in the park gazed up and saw Spang seize Helen, 10 years old, his eldest child, and throw her after her brother. Children shouted and screamed, and adults looked on in impotent horror. Lorraine, 7 years old, was the third to go. Mrs. Spang had heard the screams of Helen and came running back. She battled with her husband, a man of slight build, but her strength could not withstand his demoniacal fury. Lorraine's body followed those of her brother and sister. It caught in a tree about 100 feet down. The watchers below saw Mrs. Spang and Raymond, 5 years old, disappear from view as they ran back from the edge. In a moment, Spang was after them. There was a struggle in the brush as Mrs. Spang fought to save the boy and herself. Spang had scrambled over the edge of the rocky face. He dashed down what seemed from below to be sheer rock. He seemed to be trying to reach two of the children, whose bodies had lodged in clefts and who presumably were still alive. While a policeman fired a revolver shot at him, Spang reached the children. He dislodged them one at a time, held them up in his arms, then he heaved them as far out as he could. And from there, he threw stone, dirt, and roots at those who were trying to reach the bodies of Mrs. Spang and the children. Donald Harger and Thomas Wilson, who were at the ball field and among the first to see the tragedy, brought the two boys who seemed to be breathing to St. Raphael's Hospital. Lorraine was also brought to St. Raphael's, and Helen and her mother were taken to Grace Hospital in ambulance. All were dead when doctors examined them. Meanwhile, crowds had gathered at both the base and the top of the cliff. Hundreds watched the efforts of the firemen and police to get Spang from the tiny ledge. Rudolph Barube, a fireman with a rope slung around his waist, was lowered down the face of the rock. He came within a few feet of the maniac and tried to talk to him. but he declined to return to the top. Berube argued, cajoled, and threatened, and it was unavailing. Leisurely, he crossed himself, and then, poised as a swimmer might at the brink of a pool, he flexed his knees, threw his hands above his head, and dived. There was a murmur of horror from the crowd in the park. Spang's head struck a jutting rock, and the dive was broken. His body, bouncing from ledge to ledge, finally hurtled into the loose stone at the base. This next excerpt is from an article in the Hartford Courant, dated Wednesday, June 25, 1930. Spang family buried, city in mourning. Military honors accorded World War veteran. 6 graves in St. Peter's Cemetery at East Derby tonight contain the bodies of Raymond C. Spang, Ansonia World War veteran, his wife, and 4 children. Victims of one of the most poignant tragedies in the history of New Haven. Knowledge that Spang was being buried on the date of his birthday and wedding anniversary added to the pathos of the funeral service. World War veterans joined in according Spang full military honors. While flags throughout the city were at half-staff in final tribute to a veteran who had been mustered out of the service. Over the casket which held Spang's body was spread an American flag. Taps were blown at the end of the church service and later at the cemetery after the veteran's body had been lowered into one of the 6 graves. A last salute crackled from the rifles of an American Legion firing squad over his open grave.